You've seen the footage. A steel boat pitching through the black water of the Bering Sea, waves taller than a two-story house slamming over the rail, ice coating every surface, men in orange rain gear hauling 800-pound steel cages out of freezing water at 2 in the morning. It's one of the most dangerous jobs on the planet, and you've probably watched it from the comfort of your couch a dozen times. But here's what the cameras almost never show you. When the shift finally ends, when those exhausted men peel off their soaked gear, they don't go anywhere. There is nowhere to go. The nearest land might be 200 miles away, so instead they climb down a narrow ladder into a space most people have never seen, a space packed into the worst possible part of the entire boat. And they sleep there, willingly, 6 or 7 grown men, stacked in bunks barely bigger than coffins, inside a steel box getting hurled around by 30-foot seas. And here's the thing almost nobody stops to ask. Why would anyone build it that way? Why put the beds in the one spot on the boat that moves the most violently? There are 3 layers to this story. The first is where these crew quarters actually sit and why that location is so brutal. The second is the engineering that keeps a boat like this from rolling over while the entire crew is asleep below the waterline. And the third is something almost nobody expects, the reason these men will tell you with a straight face that they sleep better out there than they ever do on land. By the end of this video, you'll never look at one of these boats the same way again. So let's start with the space itself. The forecastle. On a traditional crab boat, the crew sleeps in a compartment called the forecastle. Fishermen just call it the forecastle, and it's tucked into the front of the boat, down below the main deck, right up in the BOW. It's a tight, low-ceilinged room lined with bunks bolted straight to the steel. There is no window with a view. There is a ladder going up, a couple of feet of standing room, and rack after rack of narrow beds. On a boat that is maybe 120 to 130 feet long with a crew of 6 or 7, personal space is measured in inches. Now here's the problem with that location, and it's a big one. The bow is the worst place on any boat to try and sleep. Think about how a ship moves through heavy seas. It doesn't slide over the waves like a surfboard. It pivots. The middle of the boat acts like the center of a seesaw, and the 2 ends swing hardest. When a crab boat climbs a 30-foot wave and then drops down the backside of it, the bow is what launches up into the air and then slams back down into the trough. Fishermen describe it as your stomach dropping like an elevator over and over all night long. In the roughest weather, a man in a forward bunk can actually be lifted off the mattress and dropped back onto it with each wave. So the crew isn't just sleeping in a cramped steel room, they're sleeping in the part of that room that gets thrown around the hardest in some of the most violent water on Earth. Winds out there regularly hit 40 miles per hour, waves routinely run 20, 30, sometimes over 40 feet. And the men down in that bow are trying to get a few hours of rest before they have to be back on deck, which raises an obvious question. If the bow is so brutal, why put the beds there at all? The answer is space. The stern of a working crab boat is real estate the owner cannot afford to waste. The back deck has to hold the crane, the hydraulics, the launcher that shoots those massive steel pots overboard, and stacks of the pots themselves, sometimes 200 of them piled 2 and 3 high. The engine room eats up the belly of the boat. The wheelhouse sits up top. That leaves the bow. On older boats, the forecastle went forward because forward was what was left. The crew got the leftover space, and the leftover space happened to be the roughest ride on the vessel. But that's the old way, because some boats carry something that changes the entire equation. The engineering nobody sees. Here's what most people don't realize when they watch these boats work. The single biggest threat out there isn't the waves themselves, it's ice. When freezing spray hits a cold steel boat, it doesn't run off. It freezes on contact. It builds up on the railings, the rigging, the stacked pots, layer after layer. A boat can take on thousands of pounds of ice in a matter of hours. And all that weight collects up high above the deck, which raises the boat's center of gravity. A boat that's too top-heavy stops fighting to stay upright. It wants to roll. That's how vessels are lost out there. Not always in some dramatic single wave, but slowly, quietly as ice stacks up and stability bleeds away while the crew is fighting to knock it off with baseball bats and mallets. So the entire boat is engineered around one goal: staying upright. Deep in the hull sit ballast tanks, giant compartments the crew can flood with seawater to lower the boat's center of gravity and hold it steady. The heavy engine sits low and central for the same reason. Every pound is accounted for because the margin between a boat that rights itself and a boat that doesn't is thinner than most people would ever guess. And this is where the modern solution to the forecastle problem comes in. On a lot of newer Bering Sea boats, they stop putting the crew up in the bow entirely. Instead, they build a tall house at the stern, sometimes 2 or 3 stories of it, and the living quarters go in there. The galley, a long table, a walk-in freezer stocked for weeks, bunk rooms with real mattresses, showers with actual hot water. On some of the newest boats, flat screens and a washing machine. It's a world away from the bare forecastle. Why the stern? Because it rides better than the bow and because it keeps the weight where the engineers want it. The crew gets a slightly smoother sleep and the boat gets better balance. Everybody wins, but make no mistake, smoother is relative. On a bad night, even the nicest bunk in the stern house is still getting thrown around inside a steel box in the middle of the deadliest water on Earth. Which brings us to the question every one of these men lives with, whether they say it out loud or not. What happens if something goes wrong while you're asleep down there? 3 in the morning. Picture it, you're off watch. You've been on deck for 18 hours hauling pots, sorting crab, soaked to the bone. You finally get into your bunk. You're asleep in under a minute because pure exhaustion does that to a person. And then the motion changes. Every experienced crab fisherman knows the feeling of a boat that isn't coming back up the way it should. A roll that hangs a beat too long at the bottom. If the ice has built up, if a wave hits wrong, if the boat gets pushed past the point where it can right itself, the men below have seconds, not minutes. And the water they'd be dropped into hovers just above freezing. In water that cold, a person can lose the use of their hands almost immediately, and survival time is measured in minutes. That's the reason a lot of these fishermen sleep in their clothes with a survival suit within arm's reach. That's the reason they know the exact path from their bunk to the deck in total darkness. Out there, the sea does not give second chances, and everyone on board knows it. This isn't hypothetical. Boats have gone down in these waters with their entire crew asleep below deck. It's the price of admission for the job, and every man who signs on understands the deal. So after all of that, the coffin-sized bunk, the elevator drop of every wave, the ice, the cold, the very real chance you don't wake up, here's the part that surprises everyone. The part nobody expects. Ask a crab fisherman if he would trade that bunk for a warm bed on solid ground, and a lot of them will tell you no, and that answer stops people cold. Part of it is simple exhaustion. After 18 or 20 hours of the hardest physical labor imaginable, sleep isn't something you chase. It hits you like a wall. Men describe dropping into a sleep so deep and so total that the roar of the sea and the slam of the bow just disappear. It's the kind of rest most people on land never experience in their entire lives, and part of it is something harder to explain. Down in those quarters, 6 or 7 men are stacked shoulder to shoulder, riding out the same storm, trusting each other with their lives. There's a closeness to it that people who work quiet office jobs will never quite understand. When you have hauled pots next to a man for 30 hours straight, when you have watched his back on an icy deck at night, sleeping 3 feet from him in a rocking steel room doesn't feel like a hardship. It feels like the safest place in the world. So the next time you see one of these boats out on the water, pitching through the dark, and you think about the men asleep somewhere below that deck, they are not just enduring it. For a lot of them, that cramped, violent little space is exactly where they want to be. Now I want to hear from you. Could you sleep down there 6 men deep in 30-foot seas, or would the first wave send you running? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you learned something today, hit that like button and subscribe. I'll see you on the next one.